Okay, I'm gonna get the class going. Okay?
I'm
Okay.
ready.
All right. Hello, 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 hello. Hi, everybody. Stop talking. Stop talking. Stop talking. Listen to me, please. Hi. Get going. Okay, so we are here at Comics University. It is our second to last class. I know everyone's so sad. Me too. But today we're going to be learning about comic book writing, specifically scripting. Comics oftentimes are a team sport. There's sometimes a writer and an artist if they are not doing both of them themselves. So today we're going to be talking with comic book writer Ivy. I've worked with Ivy on many, many projects, and they have written many, many books. So they're going to have a lot of great tips and tricks for you for the class. After we have our lecture with Ivy, then we're going to do a workshop so that you can use the skills that we'll have taught you to get some practice on comic book writing. Sound good? Okay, so I will pass it over to Ivy. All right, go ahead.
Hello. It's weird not being able to see you, so I'm just going to trust that you're all there and real. um, so, like Steen said, I'm Ivy Noelle Weir, I'm a book writer. That's my website and my handle on all things if you want to keep in touch after. All right, so a little about me. Why am I qualified to talk to you about writing comics and how to do that and why you should want to do that? I don't know why my first bullet is that I'm from Philadelphia, as that's justification. I am from Philadelphia, and I talk about it a lot. I've been writing comics professionally since 2015, which is when somebody who is in the room with you all and I sold Archival Quality to Oni Press, which went on to win the Dwayne McDuffie Award, right? I've also worked on anthologies like Deadbeats from Away Blue World, series like Bountiful Garden from Mad Cave, and then the majority of my work has been with Little Brown for Young Readers. I wrote The Secret Garden on 81st Street, Anne of West Philly, and the forthcoming Little Princess of Los Angeles in 2027 spring, Gatsby in fall 2027, and retelling of Anne Martin's Doll People in 2028. So I do a lot of writing. I also have a day job in the publishing industry, so I get the whole spectrum of it. The business side, the creative side, all of it. When I'm not writing or working on other people's books, I bake, I play a lot of video games, and I have two tiny weird dogs. You may have just seen one of them. So I get asked a lot of questions about why and how I do this, but the questions that I get the most are, did you study writing in college? I sure didn't. My undergrad is in art history and my master's is in library science. So I had no formal training as a writer, entirely self-taught, other than academic writing, which does not really apply here. Do I read comics? Yes. God, leave me alone. I worked at a comic book shop for a very long time, and I still read comics. But the third question, and probably actually the one that I get asked the most, is how did you break into the industry? Oh, look, it's Steens. In 2014, I was working in a comic book store, the incredibly hard to Google The Comic Book Shop in Wilmington, Delaware. I met Steens online through a group of comic book retailers, and we became friends. And I had had an idea for a novel that eventually we decided to turn into Archival Quality as a webcomic. So we were working on it as a webcomic, and then we sold it to Oni Press in their open submissions. And then 3 years passed, and then it came out. And I feel really bad because often when people ask me about how I broke into the industry, I kind of have to go, luck. We were working and we took a chance and we put it out there and it worked out. The fact that it worked out on the first try was very lucky and very rare. But, I think it is also just kind of the classic, you do the work and people will notice. So it's just like a few of the cool things we got to do. We got to be on TV. We had a signing at San Diego Comic-Con, and then we won the Dwayne McDuffie Award, as I said. So breaking in was really special for my first book to do all of this. But before you get to the part where you sell a book, you have to first make a book to sell. And you might be somebody who loves comics and wants to make comics but can't draw. Perhaps you, like I, were an art history major and are better at looking at other people's artwork than you are at making your own. I cannot draw, and Steens knows this firsthand from the great sketches that I've provided throughout our co-working career. But I can write. So when you are writing for comics, it starts a lot like writing for anything else, like writing for any sort of prose, any kind of writing project that you would normally do. So you think about characters, setting, plot points, solution, and then the ending. This is like the basic tenets of storytelling, right? You can watch any number of YouTube videos about story wheels, the hero's journey, any of those larger like thematic things talking about how stories are constructed. But at the end of the day, you have a story about characters in a place having a problem and finding a solution and then wrapping things up. So when you start to work, you need to have at least a general idea of how you want to go about these things. The biggest thing that I encounter in people who are getting into writing anything, but especially comics, is that they have like a character they really love, but no idea what to do with them. Or they have a plot, but there's no real ending to it. So these are all the things that you should start to think about as you work through. But really, it gets a bit more granular than that, right? Like I said, those are your classic story wheel, hero's journey, the great myth-making tradition of human oral storytelling. Really, what I like to ask myself when I am creating a story is, what story do you want to tell? Who tells the story, right? So who are your characters? Who is your narrator? What do they hope to accomplish? What stakes are they up against? What challenges do they face? How do they move past them? What do they learn from them? In the end, how are they changed? And where do they go from there? So you have a full arc in this. I tend to be a very character-driven writer. My stories originate from who tells the story and kind of go from there. Some people are not like this. Your mileage may vary. Perhaps you are somebody who is more interested in telling a specific plot and the characters are secondary to you. But when I am writing, this is how I approach it. What story do I want to tell? Who tells it? And then what are the factors that eventually lead to them being changed? If you've read a really satisfying story in your life, I guarantee you that if you sit and think about it, it kind of follows this pattern because you are following someone, you're invested in their story, and then you're seeing ultimately how it changed them and then how it changed you as a reader. So let's try it out. Let's start with Susie wants to bake a cake, right? This is the story we want to tell. Susie wants to bake a cake. Why does Susie want to bake a cake? Anyone? Any volunteer?
Any volunteer? Yes.
Someone's birthday.
It's someone's birthday.
Someone's birthday. What could potentially stop Susie from making this cake?
Anyone? All in the back. Yes. Yes.
Oven's broken.
The oven's broken.
Oh my God, what are we going to do? Now we have stakes, right? So we have the problem. What are the stakes? What would happen if Susie couldn't make the cake, if the oven could not be fixed?
What would happen if the oven isn't fixed? Yeah.
She fears she'll be a disappointment to her friends. It was her duty.
Oh my goodness. She feels she's going to be a disappointment to her friends because that was her responsibility, was the cake.
So we have emotional stakes now, right? Like this is an emotional story. This is no longer a like pragmatic story. So how can Susie make the cake and not hold that burden, even with the challenge of the oven being broken?
How can she keep it going? Yes. She makes an ice cream cake.
Amazing. So what does Susie learn about baking cakes.
What did she learn from this? What do we think? All the way in the back, yes.
Check that all her appliances are.
That she should check that her appliances are working. Yeah.
So she learned something about responsibility, right? Maybe this is a character flaw of Susie's. Like maybe Susie is just not someone who has a lot of planning or forethought. Maybe it's the day of the party and like she's just now checking that her oven isn't working. So she's learned, okay, like, yeah, I got myself out of this scrape, but I grew as a person because now I know that the reason I was so stressed out was my own doing. So now, will Susie bake another cake?
Do we think? Well, technically, she didn't bake to begin with because an ice cream cake doesn't need to be baked. So,
will she in the future bake a cake? Does she become an ice cream cake like genius? Does like where does she go from here?
Her talent.
It's her secret talent now is ice cream cakes. Yes.
There we go. So there we go. We wrote an entire story. There's character development. There were stakes. There was a challenge, and there was a satisfying ending, right? Her family, parents, friends, whatever, they were probably happy with the ice cream cake. And she learned not only can she make ice cream cakes, new talent, but also she needs to think more about planning and forethought and being responsible. So we've made an entire character out of Susie, and we've followed her journey with the cake from start to finish. And that you could write a mini comic of this right now, right? We have a whole story. So this is like a useful thought exercise for when you're in these early stages of planning. So if you have your character, you can ask yourselves these kind of questions as you're moving through this early stage of story planning, like, okay, well, what would happen if this didn't work out? Or what is, Susie's biggest fear about this not working out, right? Like that disappointment from her friends. Like you're able to start to bring challenges and stakes into things in a way that feels more natural than going. I believe I once drew scenes of sketch where I was like, and then they look for the ghost and then stuff explodes. Like, you can't just move from big moment to big moment. You need to have this time to think about what are the challenges, what are the stakes. So the other thing is that maybe you want to make comics and you don't know what to write about, right? It's all well and good for me to say, okay, like make a cake with Susie. But if you're like, okay, well, I don't have a Susie in mind. I don't care about cakes, but I also don't know what it is that I want to write about. Finding inspiration to create comics is something that I highly recommend you start to look to the external. I think the creative process is inherently something we do in a solitary way, right? Like, especially in these early stages where we really don't know what we want to do or how we really want to get started. And so I think it's very important to start looking outward. You all have taken a really great step in doing Comics University, right? Like you're engaging with your community and meeting other people. That's a great way to get inspiration. But I'm going to give you my pieces of advice, which are to read, especially comics. I can't tell you how many people I meet who go, I want to write comics. And I'm like, oh yeah, what comics do you like? And they go, I don't know, I don't read them. And I go, well, then you have a problem. The best way to learn how to make comics is to read comics and to read widely, and especially to read new comics. We all love to read Watchmen, or Claremont's X-Men or Hellboy, and it's important to read like big classics, right? To understand like why they resonated with people. But the most exciting and the most innovative things that are being done by your peers and the people who are new to the industry, because they are building on those classics. So don't think like, okay, I know everything I need to know about making comics because I've read The Killing Joke. Like, let's try to read like Delicious in Dungeon also, like try to mix it up a little bit and kind of diversify what's inspiring you. Look for small presses, indie presses, stuff at Slice, for example, so that you can find inspiration from more than just the big two or more than just the canon. Pay attention to all forms of visual storytelling, though, because this can be really important to thinking visually, which as a writer coming to comics is going to be a skill that you're going to have to hone if you're not drawing. it's not going to be natural to you if you're not an artist to think visually, to think about motion in the way that comics demand. So pay attention not only to comics, but to all forms of visual storytelling. Watch animated stuff. Huge recommendation for watching animated movies to learn more. I watched K-pop Demon Hunters this past weekend. It was great, really inspirational. So, you know, and again, diversify what you're watching. I based a lot of inspiration for my middle grade retelling of A Little Princess off of The Fall, starring Lee Pace. So, you know, you never know where you're going to find it. Go for a walk and bring a notebook. You don't have to be good at drawing in your private notebook. That's just for you and your shame to look at later by yourself. You can go out with your notebook and you can make rough sketches. And I am like a really bad eavesdropper. Like, sorry if you've ever sat next to me in a cafe. But, you know, I just constantly have a notebook on me, or more often than that, I use my notes app in my phone because I just always have it in my pocket. Go to the museum. Original comics are things like ukiyo-e paintings. You know, you're looking at pictorial languages, or, you know, various forms of like painting and storytelling that have existed for thousands of years. Like, I find that so inspirational to see art in a museum and think like, I'm doing this also, and this is a human impulse, and it just gets me really stoked to create things. And then also think about how you tell a story differently. This is where I give you full permission to be a hater. If you watch something or you read something and you're like, that sucked, think about what you would have done to make it better. And that's a good place to start thinking about, like, okay, well, what kind of stories do I want to tell? Like, what dissatisfied me about this? How I make characters is another way of approaching this, right? So, like, if you're thinking about like overall inspiration and plot elements, then you get to characters. One of the scariest moments of my life was when I found out I was going to be writing an Anne of Green Gables retelling, because people have such an affinity for that character. But I also knew I wanted to make my Anne her own person, in addition to embodying what was really loved about the classic Anne. So, you know, I think first, like, okay, well, who are they, right? We all have a like corporeal form, even though you're drawing them, they do too. So like their age, race, gender, other physical descriptors, start to think about that. We'll talk more about working with an artist on those things later, but you can start to kind of have a picture in your mind. What are 3 words that you would use to describe them? What are their goals, right? So we had a talk about Susie. What was her goal? It was to make a cake. It was to not disappoint her friends. It was to deliver for this party. What are their flaws? She ain't great at checking her oven, which probably shows that she's not super responsible. And then how do they grow throughout the story? I usually tend to write all of these things sort of piecemeal in a notebook as I'm developing the story, you know, or if I'm working with a collaborator, things like Pinterest or Google Drive are really great for just sort of dumping those ideas in so that you can both kind of bounce things around about how you see the characters developing and what they look like. You've done all this work, right? Okay, so you've plotted out your story. You know the story you want to tell. You know who the characters are. You feel inspired. You're ready to go. Oh my God, you have to actually write it now. So that's when you get to the outlining stage. You are never going to sell a book to a publisher without doing one of these. So I recommend getting practice in, even if you are initially just making work for yourself. You should practice outlining because it's a crucial skill if you do eventually want to publish and sell work. An outline is a proof that you know how a story is going to start, progress, and end. It is also a reference to keep you on track. I think of it as like past me keeping current me in line. In an outline, you are writing essentially the prose version of your comic, right? But it doesn't need to be like every single page. You can see that this is an actual piece of the outline I submitted to my publisher for our Anne of West Philly, and that is showing how I wanted to break the story down by season. And then also kind of like the major beats of what was happening, some of the major emotional beats, some of the key words about each character. You can tell, like, I'm using words like anxious and bemused and delight, like, you know, things that are going to kind of give the feel of the overall emotional tone without getting into the nitty gritty of like how each individual character is behaving. You also can do it this way. This is my outline for archival quality. As you can see, I have really changed how I outline things. My outline for archival quality was more like what you might hear referenced as a beat sheet. That is more like when you're just giving the major story beats. So you can say like, we meet Abayomi, surprise, conflict, move into the apartment, settling into the job. Like these are just the major story beats without any of that sort of like contextual flavor that I've started using in my outlines. I like the way I outline now for me because it gives me something to reference back to while I'm scripting that kind of keeps me like, and like if I look at this right now, I spent a year and a half of my life on this script. Reading this outline, I'm like, I don't know what any of these are referring to. Like some of them I do, but some I'm like, odd behavior on page 100. What is that? So like this is good for, I think, when you're starting out, like just to get an idea of like what story beats look like. You should eventually work towards building a more detailed outline. Okay, you have your outline. And now comes the fun part, scripting. Scripting is an interesting thing in comics because, and Steens will talk to you about this as I know this is going to be part of the workshop after I finish speaking, there is no standard comics script form. When you are a filmmaker working in Hollywood, there are standards to how scripts are supposed to look, television scripts, film scripts. The comic book industry does not have this. Everybody's look different. And some of them I find to be inscrutable. And some of them are very clear. Some of them you'll see people writing whole paragraphs of description. As you can see, I tend to be a little more spare in my panel descriptions. Like there is no standard across the industry, which is why the standard comic script, which you will be using, is such a valuable thing, because when you're first breaking in, you don't know what you're doing and no one can tell you what to do. So when you start scripting, the first thing you need to understand is the basic breakdown of a comic book page. And this is why I tell you to read comics if you want to start writing them, because you will start to see the mechanics of how comic book pages work as you understand how to script. The page, I'm going to break it down piece by piece here, and some of it's going to seem really obvious, so bear with me. The page. What number is the page intended to be? It seems really straightforward, but page number in comics absolutely matters, because if you want to have a double page spread, those pages need to align, right? You can't have one and then have to flip and have it not line up. If you want to end on a cliffhanger, you better hope that there's not an extra page sitting there, because what are you going to do with it? In publishing, this is called the extent. So when you work in publishing, you won't hear people say like, how many pages is it? You will say, what's the extent? So that's because books are bound in certain packages of pages. There's a little inside baseball on how books are made. Standard single issue comic is, I believe, 26 pages. So any single issue comic basically has to have 26 pages of content. Now, is that all comics? Maybe. It could also be back matter. It could also be ads. But basically, for the printer to manufacture it in a way that makes financial sense for the publisher, it has to be 26 pages. So that's why page numbers actually really matter, and also why I am famous for getting them wrong, because I'll move things around and forget to change them. Any editor that's worked with me knows this, including Steens. Panel number. So when you look at a page, you will see each of those boxes, right? Panels. Panel number is where you want to indicate to the artist or to yourself later if you're drawing it that that's where you want this specific description to take place. Don't go wild with panels. I mentored somebody in comic book writing and they were putting 10, 12 panels on a page. And I was like, it's too many. Think about the most effective comic book storytelling that you've seen. For me, a huge inspiration was Mike Mignola and Hellboy. A lot of the time he's working with 3, 4, like max 5 or 6. I feel like 6 is really like, unless you're doing something cool with panel structure, 6 is kind of where I would recommend that you sort of stop as a newbie writer. Because you're going to convey too much visual information and it's going to get confusing. As you start to get more into comics and making comics and making your own and drawing, like you can start playing around with panel structure. But as a beginner, I would say keep it under 6. Description. This is where you're giving guidance for the artist. It is a depiction of how you envision the panel. I script so that I am not being too prescriptive for the artist because the artist is my collaborator and I have faith and trust that they're going to be able to execute based on our collaborative relationship. I have seen scripts where people detail every single thing that happens in the panel. That is not how I write. I like to work more collaboratively with my artist. You can see that this is an actual script from Anne of West Philly. You can see that I give a description of Marilla, right? She steps out on the porch. She's kind of crunchy hippie. She's got a jean jacket, sundress. She wears pins. Like I'm giving the various like visual cues, but I'm not getting that prescriptive with it. I still want the artist to kind of take the vibe and run with it. And if it came back and it looked different than this, but it still fit the vibe I was going for, I would be completely happy as a writer. For me, the panel description is really to give the major thing that needs to occur in the panel and then any kind of contextual emotion that needs to be conveyed. Marilla leans across the porch, but her face looks nervous. You know, like I'm giving facial cues to convey what's going on in the scene, but I'm not telling them like Marilla leans across the porch railing, which is painted blue, to chat, and her face is this way, and also her neighbor is standing facing to the right. Like I'm not giving all of that. I want to work with them more. The character, who is speaking, thinking, or making noise. When I say making noise, that's because when you write sound effects, you write them as a character. Dialogue, what are they saying? Duh. Dialogue emphasis. How are they saying it? You can see in panel 5 in this page of script that a girl is bolded and underlined. That is an indicator to the letterer of the comic that they should be emphasizing that word in some way, because that is where I'm trying to convey, like her neighbor in this scene is like incredulous that they're taking a girl because girls are so much work, blah, blah, blah. So she's saying, I think it's wonderful what you're doing, but I never would have taken a girl. And that bolding and underline means that A, the letterer knows that that's an important word that needs to be highlighted, but also the artist knows, oh, like this is the vibe, right? Like this neighbor is maybe like nosy. She has like predisposed notions about what girls are like it gives you so much context into the character. And I know when I'm scripting something, I sound like a weirdo because I'm sitting at my desk just saying stuff out loud with different emphasis while I try to figure out where that dialogue emphasis is going to go. Comics are a team sport. I just talked about a lot of these roles, but let's get into them more. You are the writer. Congratulations. You also have an editor. This is someone who makes you a better writer and works with the whole team. Think of the editor as your coach. The letterer. This is another member of your team. If you are not lettering your own comics and the artist is not lettering them, then you will work with a letterer. The letterer is integral to the vibe, feel, context of the panels in your comic. They are the ones that are often doing the sound effects. They are the ones who are making those dialogue emphasis points that I was just talking about. Letterers are the unsung heroes of the comic book industry. The artist, obviously, this is who you think of as your main collaborator in comics because you two definitely are doing the most work together. This is the person who is drawing it. However, the artist may be someone who needs additional help because of scheduling or because of workload or just because they want to, and in which case they may hire an inker. So that is like, the artist may do the thumbs, sketch with pencil, someone might go over with inks. They might hire a flatter. This is just like flat colors that are getting laid down. Or they might hire a colorist who is doing all of the color, right? So the flat colors and then also the shading, highlights, values, all of that. And then there's also book designers. This is something that doesn't get talked about a lot in comics because it's a different kind of visual medium than what we're used to talking about. But all books need to be designed by someone who knows how to typeset, lay out pages, make covers, do all of the things that bring it into being an actual object. So there are a lot of people involved in comic book making. And that script needs to be clear to all of them. These are the biggest mistakes new writers make, in my opinion. Overstuffing the panel. Not everything needs to happen in one panel. You can let the moment breathe. You can not have every panel be action. I believe very strongly in sort of a manga school of writing. If you read a lot of manga, you'll know there are plenty of moments where people are just being silent or sharing like a look, or there's just like a beat, a moment. Let your audience breathe with you. Crowding with dialogue. Biggest thing I see from new writers in comics is speech balloons that go on and on and on and on. And I think this is also something that people from prose to comics are very guilty of. Just show and not tell. It's a visual medium, right? So you don't need to tell everybody everything. You can show it. Understanding static motion. I'm going to show you an example of this on the next page, I think. But putting multiple action directions in a single panel. This is like the number one mistake new people make when they're writing comics. And it's honestly like you shouldn't feel bad. You're learning. We think of things as being in motion, but comics are a static thing. You're not writing a movie, you're writing a comic. So you can't have one panel description be she crosses the room and sets down the mug. That's two actions. She can cross the room and then she can set down the mug, but she can't do it in one panel. And holding on to your ego. You need to trust and collaborate with your partners in comic book making, even if it is your idea, right? If you're the one who was the one kind of generated the project and this is your concept, but you brought in others to work on it. The minute you brought in other people to work on it, they're your collaborators. They have as much of a stake. They have as much of a co-ownership, and your ego will only make the relationship bad. When you are willing to let go and accept trust and collaboration, you will be delightfully surprised by how much better your work becomes. Right. So here's the thing I was talking about. Here are a couple, this is a very clear example. I think this is from the Clouds Understanding Comics. Essential book. This is a great example of some of the most common mistakes that you see in comic book writing. Grim-faced George lifted his lollipop as a caption. Yeah, we can tell that's what that dude is doing. We don't need to be told that. This one is captioned, the captain's mighty blow misses. And then he also says, oh, I missed. And then the other guy says, yeah, and I dodged. Like, we get it. That's enough. It's too many slices. We also have Amy here saying, I feel so sad when she's clearly sad and crying. We don't need her to tell us that. These are all things that are trying to insert prose narrative into a visual medium. So if you look at these and you were to remove all of this text, you would still understand everything that's happening in one of these panels. Let's watch it come to life. I'm trying to be mindful of time. So this is something that Scenes and I worked on together. This is some Scenes art. This is for an anthology we worked on together. So this is my script and Scenes' thumbs. So these are the initial rough sketches that we sent in to the editor to be like, this is what we're thinking about. So you can see grand old house, mansion, run down, vine covered. And then you can see like Steens' interpretation of that. You can see how it flows. And you can see how Steens saw my panels and then decided how they wanted to kind of interpret the flow of them. And also that they added an additional panel that I did not have in there. This was a 3-panel script page, and Steens was like, I think it would flow better if we had like a close-up of the portrait. So I'm adding another panel, and it does flow better. Inks, same page, now it's inked. So you can see that it's gotten a little bit more solid now. Steens and I have probably been talking during this point, like looking at the thumbs. We agreed that the way it was laid out was better with the extra panel. And now we can see that the inks are coming in. We're getting towards the final page. Final page. Here it is, all colored in, designed with these creepy red lines that Steens put throughout this whole story because it was a horror story, colored to be creepy, feel abandoned. And this is before the letterer comes in. So there's no text. You can see all the text boxes in the script, but they're not in there yet. So that's like how it all comes together, right? This, to this, to that. Beautiful. I get so stoked every time this process happens. So let's say, okay, you've gotten to this point. You found collaborators, you've made a comic, you're happy with how it's going. Now you want to make money off of it. It's okay to want to make money off of it. That's how people survive in this industry. Unfortunately, we live in a society. So this is where I get to use the fact that I work in the publishing industry to give you all some insider knowledge about pitching. Pitching is when you take your concept, your proof of concept, or your finished comic, and you try to get it published with a traditional publisher, not self-published. So you're going to need a lot of the things that we talked about. You're going to need an outline. They want to know that you know how to land the plane. So you need the full story to be outlined. If you don't have the full comic done, they definitely want a full outline. You need a synopsis. Get ready, because there's even more of these. You need a shorter outline that hits just the major parts of the story. And then once this, you need a log line. You need an even shorter outline. Which is what you should think of as like your elevator pitch, right? 1 to 2 lines max. This is what you would sell somebody on the comic if you had 5 minutes with an editor to get them to acquire it. Your bio. Why should you tell this story? You don't have to have credentials, but like, why are you telling it? You need some information about yourself for personal buy-in. Your characters, if they're named in the story, they belong in the pitch package. You need a character bio. If you have a guy who's named like customer number 1, you don't have to put him in there. But if you name them, they need to be in there. They need a little description. And ideally, if you're working with an artist or you're drawing, they need a little sketch. Script pages. Comic book editors like to know that you can write a comic book script. So even if you don't have the full script, you do need some example pages. Same with art samples. They're going to want to see that the art looks good, whether that's by you or somebody else. And then usually folks will like to see about 10 finished pages. So finished, that's not saying you're never going to have to do them again. I think Steens drew the first 10 pages of archival quality, like 6 times?
It was 3 times, but it felt like 6. Yeah.
I feel like it was like, we kept having to go back and do it again. So you need something that appears finished so that they can kind of get a feel for the whole thing if it's not completely done already. Do you need an agent? This is the thing I get asked a lot as someone who works in the industry. If you're interested in publishing traditionally, you probably need an agent. Why do you need an agent? Many publishing houses will not accept what's called unsolicited pitches. So if you don't have an agent, they have relationships with agents. The reason they like to work with agents is because they have to negotiate lengthy, complicated contracts that you as an artist may not know how to navigate. That's on the publishing side. On your side, an agent makes sure that you are not taken advantage of and that you are paid well. They read those lengthy, complicated contracts and they are able to make changes, make demands, Recently, I've talked with my agent about trying to get clauses built into my contracts that my work cannot be used for AI scraping, right? Like these are things that an agent can like help you with. How you get one? It's hard. It's intimidating. A lot of people get really scared of the querying process, but if you can divorce yourself from rejection fear, the querying process is not that bad. It's simpler than a pitch. It's more concise. You're writing a query letter that's basically summarizing what your project is and why you want to get it published. Eric Smith, who is an agent and a fellow Philadelphian and an all-around great dude, has this really great way of summing it up as the hook, the book, and the cook. So what is the hook? Why is this book like appealing, right? That's your elevator pitch, or like why it's unique or why it must be published. What is the book? This is your brief synopsis of the concept and maybe a little of the plot. And then who is the cook? That's you. Why are you the one to tell this story? Why are you passionate about telling this story? You don't need bona fides. You just need some reason why you are the one to do it. You also need comp titles. Comp titles are how we sell everything in publishing, right? You need to be able to, I'm sure you've seen it in your day-to-day life. You pick up any book cover, you go to any like web page sales listing for a book, X meets Y in Z. This is how all marketing copy really works. Partially this is because of metadata, but it's also a way for agents in this case to know that you understand the market and that your book is sellable and that you understand that your book is sellable. So comp titles, books that are like your book. And you might think, there's no book that's like my book. My book is beautiful and unique. That's not true. There's absolutely a book that's like your book. It may not seem immediately to you like your book, but there are books that are like your book in some way. So like, even if you're writing like an autobiography, look at other autobiographies that are not similar to your life story, but similar to the tone you're trying to capture, right? Like, I want this to feel like so-and-so. That's a comp. You have to keep these recent because it proves that you are knowing the industry. That also helps your agent to sell it. If you're pointing to a book that came out 20 years ago, they can't really prove one way or the other that it's actually a comp, right? Like everybody comps everything to Donna Tartt's The Secret History. If like someone goes to the library in it, that's terrible. As a publicist, I hate this. But if you're looking around at your peers, it's a good thing to kind of know what else is in the space. Envision your jacket copy. How would you sell it? If you picked it up in a bookstore, what would it say on the jacket or the cover that would bring you in? And then who are you? You don't have to have published before. As I said, I had never published anything before. I was a 2-time college dropout working in a comic book store. You have reasons for why you want to tell this story. And that's important to put in your query letter. Creator-owned versus IP. I will gloss over this because I want to make sure you guys have time to do your workshop. But creator-owned, that's your idea. It's unsolicited from a publisher. You have the option to retain some rights to the title. You will accrue royalties on it. And you will eventually have the right to revert the rights to you in most contracts. Intellectual property. That means the idea was solicited to you from a publisher. Secret Garden on 81st Street and Anne of West Philly were both IP. I was approached by Little Brown to write those. My subsequent books with them were creator-owned because I came up with the concept. IP, they came to me. Publisher owns the idea and rights. Like, I don't own any dramatic rights to those books, right? Like, if they got a movie made out of them, cool, I'm not involved. An agent can negotiate the contract, but typically the publisher will retain those rights. You might not get royalties from them. That's case by case. And it doesn't only apply to things like licensed characters. People usually think, oh, if you're working on license, you're writing like Batman or whatever. It can really be, oh, an editor at a publishing house said they wanted to do a modern Anne of Green Gables. And so they came to me, and now that's their idea that I'm writing. IP can mean a wide variety of things. A lot of your initial work in comics will probably be IP. Writing for IP is also a whole other ballgame when it comes to expectations. There's more limitations. There's more editorial involvement, sometimes licensor approval. Like if you're writing Star Wars, not only does your editor have to look at it, Disney has to look at it. You can expect more online criticism from people who are fans of whatever thing it is. And don't read it. Don't look at it. That's their problem. Don't expect always to choose your artist or to contribute as heavily to the art process when you're working with IP. Don't expect a ton of money. Doesn't pay super well usually because you didn't come up with the concept, so they have more negotiating power. And be ready to walk away from the project at the end. Don't do free labor. I will promote IP projects that I work on, but to an extent where I know I'm not getting paid anymore, if that makes sense. But do your part to help promote because it helps you and it helps the artist. It's just how much of your time realistically you want to give. How do you keep going when you want to quit? I want to quit every single time I sit down to write. So I have gotten really good at this. Every time I start, I go, why did I do this myself? Take a break. It's okay to take a break. You will hit your deadline if you step away for 15 minutes. I promise you. Watch or read something that you love. I watch Spirited Away every time I'm having a little crash out about writing. It makes me feel reinvigorated. Basically, any Hayao Miyazaki movie makes me feel reinvigorated to create stuff. Can't stop that old freak from making stuff that rocks. Ask a friend to take a look or just to hype you up. I do this with Steens all the time. I do this with other friends. I'm like, hey, can you look at this? I've been looking at it for too long. And remember that every writer who has ever lived has felt like this. No one likes it. But at the end of the day, you do it because you do love it, even if it hurts you. Resources. Here's a nice little resource page for you. The comics standard script, which you're going to learn more about. Cartoonist of color and queer cartoonist databases. Amazing for finding collaborators. Websites for current comic book writers who offer writing resources. Greg Pak and Fred Van Lente both put their scripts online. That is how I learned how to write scripts because I was learning before the comic standard script was made. Thank goodness for those two. Maria Vicente and Eric Smith. Eric is the agent I mentioned before. Maria is another agent. They both represent a lot of graphic novelists, and they both have really great resources on their websites for learning how to pitch and just about the publishing industry in general. I've worked with them as colleagues in the publishing industry and also know them both personally. Great people. Thank you. Go write comics.
Yay. Thank you, Ivy. Okay, so stop sharing your screen for me so we can see your lovely face. Hey, hi.
Hi. I'm going to drink water real quick.
Yeah, do as much as you need. So I do have a couple of questions for you before we move on to the workshop. One thing, you talk about how writing is a team sport. Can you talk about a time where the communication broke down between you and an artist? Also, can you talk about a time where you felt you and the artist share the same brain?
It's hilarious that you're asking me this question. So there are always going to be times where you're going to disagree with your collaborator. I mean, there are going to be times when you disagree with everyone in your life in some way, right? So there are going to be moments where, as a writer, you get a page back and you're like, well, this is not at all how I envisioned this, or I feel like you're missing what I'm saying. And I know there were moments in, especially the creation of Archival Quality, which I think also had the added layer of the fact that we were new to doing this and we were learning how to do it together, where we were running into friction about how we wanted certain things to happen. And I think the way that we worked through it then, and the way that I learned a lot from that, is about how you communicate to each other. You are partners in this, you are collaborators, and so you can disagree with each other, but you keep it respectful and clear. It's a conversation and not an attack. And I think that is when I say, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to new writers is to check their ego. That's kind of why, because there will be a moment when you go, no, I have a vision in my head and this doesn't align with it and you're just not getting it. And you have to take a step back and go, okay, are they not getting it? Or am I unwilling to see a different way forward because I'm caught up in this emotionally? And often you will find that there is a middle ground that you're both able to reach if you're willing to just like take a step back. When you're working in a creative field, these things can feel so personal. Because it is like it's your baby, right? Like you're really passionate about it, and to get those things can be really hard. But you develop a thicker skin over time, but also like you just have to remember sometimes like I need a minute, and then I can approach this like an adult. There are plenty of moments where I feel like artists and I have shared the same brain. Like I want to say that especially like I feel like when I was working on Bountiful Garden and Scenes, you know, because you worked on that with us, Kelly and I would work and I would get pages from Kelly and I'd be like, this is amazing. Like this is exactly what I had in mind. Like this is better than I had in mind. Like working with Kelly Williams on that book was so cool because I let him just kind of get weird with it. I was like, it's a plant monster, go nuts. And then he would come back and I'd be like, hell yeah, brother.
Yeah, it's always a nice surprise when you get some pages back and you're like, I couldn't even imagine it being this good.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
Yeah. And definitely when it comes to friction in collaboration, I think what Ivy was saying about stepping back is a great idea. Kind of like how I don't respond to emails until 24 hours later because I like to fire from the hip and, you know, fight with people and assert my dominance. But you don't have to do that, you know, especially if you want to have a good relationship with your collaborator. The other question I have for you is practice. How do you get practice in? You know, a lot of times with artists, they can go to a figure drawing class or they can walk around and doodle, as you were kind of suggesting earlier. What about you? What are some of the things that you do to practice your writing? Are you writing long form stuff and hammering away at it? Are you writing short form stuff? What do you do?
So for me, a lot of the exciting part is like the research because I'm a nerd. So I get a lot of practice in when I'm like, okay, I know I want to work on a book about this subject. So I'm going to start really researching into that subject. I'm going to get really into it. And then I get super excited about it while I'm researching it. And then I'll just start like sketching out little scenes in my notebook or just like in a throwaway doc of like, okay, like this is how I would use this, or, you know, something like that. A lot of my work is informed from various like historical things. So if I'm looking in like an archive and I see something that I'm like, oh, I want to use that, like I'll make sure that I write it down. I try to be good about writing little scripts that I know no one else is going to see. But I don't always have the time to do that because I have a day job. But if you can do that, I recommend it. I have like a whole comic book series that I've written that no one has ever seen and will ever see about a mech pilot. And that's just sort of what I do, like when I know that I'm rusty about scripting or I haven't written in a while. I also, like I said, I write a lot of things down on my phone. And then sometimes I like to go back and look through them and go, what? Let's see. This one says, underground maze / talking chihuahua. What does that mean, Ivy? We may never know.
That's really great that you do that because I do the same thing. I've got a whole list of miscellaneous ideas for Heart of the City, and it doesn't matter, you know, if I have them fleshed out or not. You know, the idea is there, so I can always come back to it as, you know, some form of practice. So
yeah.
Any questions from our students today? Any at all? Any? Yes, all the way in the back.
How do you figure out pacing like after the outline? It's like just like organizing your own teaching system with the like right of it as a all words.
Yeah. The question was, how do you handle pacing once the outline is done and you're trying to get into the scripting of the panels? How do you figure out the pacing for that?
So I do this a way that I don't recommend. Okay, so you know how I said I was self-taught and I didn't major in writing and no one ever taught me how to write? When I eventually met other writers and they would tell me about how they worked, I'd be like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean you're so organized? I tend to just go. Like, my first draft is for nobody. I tend to just take the outline and start scripting and just script the whole thing. And I know it's bad and I'm never going to submit it to somebody. Some parts of it might make it into what would actually, like, I don't even call it a first draft. I think of it as like a 0.5 draft, right? Like, it's really just to get the beats out. You can also dance around in that. There have been times where I'm like on a really tight deadline where I do a version of that where I'm basically just doing that for like the major plot beats, right? So like the introduction, major conflict, resolution, you know, like I'm kind of like writing these like chunks of pages. But as a rule, I literally would just go. I will sit down and write, and I will put out that first draft, which will be too short and really bad. I want to reiterate, really bad. In like a week. You should not write a book in a week. You want to you want it to take longer than that. Like but that first draft is really where I work out those plotting and pacing issues, because the thing that's different from writing an outline to getting to the script is you have much more of an economy of space in the script. You can't get as wordy. So pacing, you have to finesse. That first kind of speed run, that 0.5 draft, allows me to figure out where I need to adjust before I can go in and actually write a good draft. And normally I'll sort of like save that one and then sort of Frankenstein parts of it into it. So I'm not rewriting everything from scratch, but I'm definitely like revising. I know that a lot of people I know who are prose writers say the same thing about how they write prose, is that basically like they speed run a first draft. It's bad. No one looks at it. And it's really just to get that version of it out of your head. This is why you should start with short comics as you're learning these things. I made a mistake in my life, which is that the first comic book script I ever wrote was 256 pages long. Don't do what I did.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
You made it through, because that was stupid. What were we doing?
What were we doing? I was in grad school at the same time. I don't know how I'm still alive. But we don't do that. Like start with like a 25-page thing and build from there. And you'll get, the more you get comfortable working in a script format, the faster that first draft will go.
Economy of space is really the key takeaway from that, though. You only have so much space on the page. You know, you can keep writing as much as you want, but you only have so many pages that they're going to give you. They're not going to let you make the book bigger, you know? So.
No.
Okay.
You can't David Foster Wallace it.
No, you cannot. So keep that in mind as we move on to the next part. But I want to say big thanks to Ivy for coming around and talking to us about writing comics. Thank you.
Yay.
And yeah, that's it for you. I will text you later so you can get paid.
Sick. Also, I mean, I wanna see the comics that you make after Comics U. So if you post them online, you can tag me. I want to see them.
Okay.
You have my info. Everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Excellent.
Thank you for coming.
All right.